I woke up on Thanksgiving morning to the sound of nothing. Now, when you've lived as long as I have, 73 years on this earth, you learn that silence can mean many things. Sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes it's lonely. But that morning, the silence felt different. It felt wrong. I've always been an early riser. Even now, my body wakes me at 5:30 without an alarm, just like it has for decades. On Thanksgiving, I'm usually up even earlier, excited in that quiet way older folks get about traditions. I'd be thinking about the turkey I'd need to prep, the potatoes I'd peel while watching the parade, the way my grandchildren's faces would light up when they smelled the pumpkin pie baking. But that morning, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, something felt off. The house was too quiet. I sat up slowly, my knees protesting as they always do these days, and reached for my robe. The fabric was soft, worn from years of use, and it smelled faintly of the lavender sachets I keep in my drawers. I shuffled toward my bedroom door and paused, listening. Nothing. No sound of little feet running down the hallway. No cartoons playing on the television. No smell of coffee brewing, which was strange because my son Michael always made the first pot. He knew I liked my coffee strong and hot, ready when I came downstairs. I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. The morning light was streaming through the windows at the end of the hall, soft and golden, the kind of light that usually makes a home feel warm. But as I stood there, the warmth didn't reach me. The house felt hollow, like a shell. "Michael?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the emptiness. "Amanda?" No answer. I walked down the hallway, peeking into the guest room where my grandchildren usually slept when they stayed over. The beds were made, not slept in. The stuffed animals they always brought were gone. My heart started to beat a little faster, not from panic yet, just confusion. Maybe they went out early, I told myself. Maybe Michael wanted to get to the store before the crowds, or maybe Amanda took the kids to see the parade preparations downtown. Yes, that had to be it. I made my way downstairs, holding onto the railing like I always do. The stairs in this house are steep, and I'm careful these days. As I descended, I kept expecting to hear something, anything. A door opening, a voice calling out that they'd just stepped outside for a moment. But the house stayed silent. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped in the doorway. The counters were clean, too clean. Usually by Thanksgiving morning, there'd be mixing bowls sitting out, ingredients scattered around, evidence of the organized chaos that comes with preparing a big meal. Instead, everything was put away, spotless. I walked over to the coffee maker and touched it. Cold. That's when my eyes caught the driveway through the kitchen window. I moved closer, pressing my palm against the cool glass, and looked out. Both cars were gone. Michael's truck, the one I'd helped him with the down payment on 2 years ago. Amanda's SUV, the one she'd insisted she needed for the kids. Both spaces empty, just oil stains on the concrete where they usually parked. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. I'd love to know where you're watching this from and what time it is where you are. Drop a comment below and let me know. Are you listening to this while cooking your own Thanksgiving meal? Or maybe you're winding down after a long day? And if this story is speaking to you, please hit that like button and subscribe. I share these stories because I believe we all need to hear each other's truths, and your support means the world to me. Now, let me continue. I turned away from the window, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There had to be an explanation. Michael wouldn't just leave without telling me. We'd talked about today just yesterday. He'd asked me what time I wanted to start cooking, whether I needed him to pick up anything from the store. And then I saw it. A piece of paper on the counter, folded neatly and held down by the little turkey-shaped magnet I'd bought at a craft fair years ago. My hands felt strangely steady as I picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was Amanda's. Neat, slightly slanted, the kind of handwriting that always looked effortless. I read the words once, then again. Then a third time, as if reading them more carefully would change what they said. "Mom, please don't worry. We decided to spend Thanksgiving in Hawaii this year. You wouldn't have liked the flight, so we thought it best to let you rest at home. Back in a week. Love, Amanda." I stood there holding that note, and the strangest thing happened. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought I'd feel my throat close up, my eyes burn, my chest tighten with that awful pressure that comes right before tears. But none of that came. Instead, I felt very, very calm. I read the note one more time, focusing on specific words. We decided. Not, we wanted to ask you. Not, we hoped you'd understand. Just, we decided. And that part about the flight. You wouldn't have liked the flight. As if they knew what I would or wouldn't like. As if my comfort was the reason they'd left me behind, and not something else entirely. I set the note back on the counter, smoothing it out carefully, and walked over to the coffee maker. My hands moved automatically, measuring grounds, pouring water, pressing the button. The machine gurgled to life, and I stood there watching it drip, drip, drip into the pot. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. 6:15 in the morning. On Thanksgiving Day. I poured myself a cup when it was ready, added cream the way I like it, and carried it over to the kitchen table. I sat down in my usual chair, the one facing the window where I could see the bird feeder in the backyard. A cardinal landed on it as I watched, bright red against the pale morning sky. It pecked at the seeds for a moment, then flew away. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth spread through me, and for the first time in a very long time, I let myself think clearly. Really, truly, clearly. Not about what I should feel, or what a good mother would do, or how I should react to keep the peace. Just what was actually true. And the truth was this. I was sitting alone in a house on Thanksgiving morning, drinking coffee I'd made myself after my son and his family had flown to Hawaii without telling me. They'd left a note, not made a phone call, not invited me, not even had the decency to tell me to my face. A note. I set my coffee cup down and looked around the kitchen. At the refrigerator I'd bought when they said their old one wasn't big enough. At the new curtains I'd sewn because Amanda wanted something more modern. At the table where I'd shared hundreds of meals, always making sure everyone else had seconds before I took any for myself. And sitting there in that silent house, with that note on the counter and an empty driveway outside, something inside me shifted. I didn't cry. I just started thinking. Sitting there with my coffee, my mind drifted back. Not to escape what had just happened, but to understand how I'd arrived at this moment. It started 3 years ago, when my husband Harold passed away. We'd been married for 48 years. He went peacefully in his sleep, which everyone said was a blessing, and maybe it was. But peaceful or not, losing him left a hole in my life that I didn't know how to fill. Our little house, the one we'd bought when Michael was just a baby, suddenly felt too big and too empty all at once. I remember standing in our bedroom a few weeks after the funeral, looking at Harold's side of the closet. His shirts still hung there, pressed and waiting. I couldn't bring myself to touch them yet. That's when Michael showed up. He'd been checking on me regularly, calling every day, stopping by with groceries I hadn't asked for. At first, I was grateful. It felt good to know someone cared, that I wasn't completely alone in the world. One evening, he sat me down at my kitchen table, the same table where Harold and I had shared thousands of meals. "Mom," he said, his voice gentle, concerned. "I've been thinking, you shouldn't be alone right now. It's not healthy." I told him I was managing just fine, and I was. Grief is hard, but I'd learned over the years that being alone and being lonely are two different things. But Michael persisted. "Amanda and I have been talking. We have that extra room downstairs. The kids would love having you closer. And honestly, Mom, we could use your help. Amanda's working full-time now, and daycare is so expensive." The way he said it made it sound like we'd both be helping each other. Like it was a partnership. "You could stay in your house," he continued, "but wouldn't it be nice to wake up to the sound of the grandkids, to have family around?" When he put it that way, how could I say no? I thought about those quiet mornings in my empty house, making coffee for one, eating dinner alone while the television hummed in the background. The idea of being surrounded by life again, by laughter and noise and purpose, felt like exactly what I needed. So I said yes. Michael was thrilled. He hugged me tight and promised it would be wonderful. "We're going to take such good care of you, Mom." What he didn't mention right away was that he needed help with the down payment on a bigger house. The one they were renting was too small, he explained, but if we pooled our resources, we could get something really nice. Something with room for everyone. I had the money. Harold had been careful with our savings, and the life insurance policy had been generous. Michael said I could think of it as an investment in our family's future. I wrote the check without hesitation. Looking back now, I can see how it all unfolded. But at the time, I was just a widow who wanted to feel needed again. The first few months in the new house were exactly what Michael had promised. I'd wake up to the sound of my grandchildren giggling in the next room. Amanda would ask my advice about recipes. Michael would sit with me in the evenings and tell me about his day at work. I felt useful again. I took care of the kids while Michael and Amanda worked. I'd pack their lunches, help with homework, read bedtime stories. When Amanda mentioned the old washing machine was broken, I bought a new one. When Michael said they were struggling with the electric bill one winter, I quietly took over the utilities. It felt good to help. To be the kind of mother and grandmother who could ease their burdens. They called me a blessing. That word came up a lot. "You're such a blessing, Mom. We're so blessed to have you here." I wore that word like a warm coat. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. It happened so gradually that I didn't notice at first. The requests for help became expectations. The gratitude became assumptions. When I suggested maybe I'd like to visit my friend Dorothy one weekend, Amanda looked surprised. "But who'll watch the kids?" When I mentioned I was tired one evening and might skip cooking dinner, Michael seemed annoyed. "We were counting on you, Mom." The phrase, "we were counting on you," came up more and more. I started to feel less like family and more like staff. But I told myself I was being sensitive. They were busy, stressed, working hard. Of course they relied on me. That's what family does. We help each other. Then came the moment that should have woken me up sooner. It was about 6 months ago. I wasn't feeling well, just a spring cold, and I'd gone to lie down early. I was in my room with the door cracked open when I heard Amanda on the phone in the hallway. I know, she was saying to someone, her voice carrying that tone people use when they're venting. She means well, but she's so set in her ways. Everything has to be done her way, and honestly, sometimes it's just easier to work around her. There was a pause while the person on the other end spoke. "Oh, we can't ask her to leave," Amanda continued. "Michael would never forgive himself. Plus, she helps with so much. The bills, the kids, we'd be lost without her money, honestly." Her money. Not her. Her money. I lay very still in my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something cold settle in my chest. She kept talking. "But between you and me, sometimes I just want my house back. You know what I mean? Like, it's nice having the help, but I miss having our own space. Our own space." As if I was intruding. As if this wasn't the house I'd helped buy. I didn't confront her. I didn't mention what I'd heard. I just filed it away in some quiet corner of my mind and kept going. Because what else could I do? Where else would I go? I convinced myself I'd misunderstood. That Amanda was just having a bad day. That she didn't really mean it the way it sounded. But after that, I started noticing other things. The way they'd make plans without asking if I wanted to join. The way Amanda would reorganize the kitchen after I'd cooked, moving things to where she preferred them. The way Michael would talk about his house and his mortgage, even though my name was on half the paperwork and I'd paid far more than half the bills. I was living in their space, cooking in their kitchen, helping raise their children. But I was doing it with my money, on my time, with my energy. Sitting at that kitchen table on Thanksgiving morning, holding my coffee and staring at that note, all of those memories arranged themselves into a pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. I hadn't been invited to live with them because they loved me. I'd been invited because I was useful. And the moment I wasn't useful, the moment I might be inconvenient, they'd left me behind without a second thought. I finished my coffee and stood up slowly. For 3 years, I'd convinced myself this was my home. But it wasn't. It was their house. One I'd been paying for while pretending I belonged. And as I rinsed my cup in the sink and placed it carefully in the dish rack, I realized something that should have scared me but didn't. I was done pretending. I picked up that note again. My fingers traced over Amanda's handwriting, smooth and confident. She'd probably written it quickly, maybe while packing her suitcase, squeezing it in between choosing swimsuits and booking excursions. "You wouldn't have liked the flight." That sentence bothered me more than the rest. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so casual, so certain, as if she knew me well enough to decide what I would or wouldn't enjoy without ever asking. Had I ever said I didn't like flying? I couldn't remember. Harold and I had flown to visit his sister in Arizona years ago. It was fine. A little cramped maybe, but nothing I couldn't handle. But that wasn't really the point, was it? The point was that they'd made a choice. A family vacation. Hawaii, Thanksgiving week. And somewhere in all that planning, all those excited conversations about beaches and resorts and luau's, they decided I didn't fit. I folded the note and set it down. My hands felt steady. My mind felt clear. I walked through the living room slowly, my slippers shuffling against the hardwood floor I'd paid to have refinished last year. The morning light was stronger now, pouring through the windows and illuminating everything with that particular brightness that makes dust particles visible in the air. I stopped in front of the television, 65 inches, mounted on the wall. Michael had wanted it for the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Amanda had thought it was too big, too extravagant. But when I offered to buy it as a Christmas gift, suddenly it was perfect. I ran my hand along the back of the sofa. Cream-colored, modern, the kind with clean lines and firm cushions that look beautiful but aren't particularly comfortable. Amanda had seen it in a catalog and fallen in love. $3,000. I'd paid for it without blinking. The coffee table, the end tables, the lamps, the bookshelf, all mine. I moved into the kitchen, opening cabinets one by one. The dishes, the glasses, the set of copper pots Amanda had admired at a kitchen store. I'd bought those for her birthday, watching her face light up as she opened the box. The refrigerator hummed beside me. Stainless steel, French doors, ice maker built into the door. Their old one had worked just fine, but Amanda wanted something that matched her vision for the kitchen. I'd made that vision possible. The washer and dryer in the laundry room, the patio furniture on the back deck, the lawnmower in the garage, the router that kept their internet running. Even the fancy blender that sat on the counter, the one Amanda used every morning for her smoothies. I'd paid for all of it. Not because they'd asked, really. They'd mentioned needs, expressed wishes, made comments about how nice it would be to have this or that. And I'd stepped in, opened my wallet, solved the problem. Because that's what I thought love looked like. I walked back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed. On my nightstand was a photograph of Harold, taken maybe 10 years before he died. He was smiling at something outside the frame, his eyes crinkled at the corners the way they always did when he laughed. "What would you think about all this?" I asked his picture softly. Harold had always been practical, generous but clear-eyed. He would have seen what was happening long before I did. He probably would have pulled me aside months ago and asked me, gently, why I was working so hard to buy affection. I touched the frame, then opened the drawer of my nightstand. Inside was a blue folder, the kind with pockets and a little elastic band to keep it closed. I'd always been organized, the type of person who kept receipts and warranty cards and instruction manuals filed away neatly. Harold used to tease me about it. "You keep track of everything," he'd say, shaking his head with amusement. I pulled out the folder and opened it. Page after page of receipts. Every major purchase I'd made since moving into this house, each one with my name printed clearly at the top. Some were years old, the paper starting to yellow at the edges. Others were recent, still white and crisp. Television, sofa, appliances, furniture. I even had the receipt for the down payment on the house itself, the cashier's check made out with my signature at the bottom. I flipped through them slowly, not reading every word, just remembering. Each piece of paper represented a moment when I'd thought I was helping. When I'd believed I was being a good mother, a good grandmother, a valued member of the family. But looking at them now, they felt different. They felt like proof. I closed the folder and held it in my lap, feeling its weight. Not heavy, really, but substantial, important. "It's all mine anyway," I whispered to the empty room. The words surprised me. Not because they weren't true, but because saying them out loud made something shift inside my chest. Something that had been tight for a very long time loosened just a fraction. I stood up and walked to my closet, pulling out my phone from where I'd left it charging overnight. I didn't use it much, mostly just to call Dorothy or check the weather. But I knew how to look things up when I needed to. I typed slowly, my fingers not quite used to the small keyboard. Moving company near me. Several results appeared. I scrolled through them, reading reviews, looking at ratings. One had particularly good comments. "Family owned," people said. professional, respectful. I tapped the phone number. It rang 3 times before someone answered. A man's voice, friendly and alert despite the early hour. "Good morning, Prestige Moving Services. How can I help you?" I took a breath. "Good morning. I need to schedule a move. Tomorrow, if possible." There was a brief pause. "Tomorrow?" "That's Thanksgiving, ma'am. We do work holidays, but there's an additional fee." "That's fine," I said, my voice calm and certain. "I can pay whatever it costs." "All right then." I could hear him clicking on a keyboard. "Can I get your name and address?" I gave him the information, speaking clearly, taking my time. "And how much are we moving? Full house or just a few items?" I looked around my bedroom, then thought of the living room, the kitchen, the garage. "Quite a bit," I said. "I'll have a list ready for you when you arrive." "Perfect. We can have a crew there by 8 in the morning. Does that work?" "That works beautifully," I said. We finished the details, and I hung up. The house was still quiet around me, but the silence felt different now. Not empty, not sad, just waiting. I walked to my desk and pulled out a notepad and pen. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "Items to move." Then I started writing. Every single thing I'd ever paid for. I sat at my desk for the rest of that morning, the blue folder open beside me, my pen moving steadily across the paper. It's funny how much you can forget when you're not paying attention, but when you sit down and really look, really remember, it all comes back. The television came first on my list. That was easy. I could picture Michael's face when I told him I wanted to get it for Christmas. He'd tried to protest, said it was too much, but his eyes had lit up in a way that told me he wanted it desperately. Next, the sofa set. I remembered the day Amanda and I went shopping for it. She'd walked through that furniture store like a woman on a mission, pointing at different pieces, sitting on them, testing them. When she finally found the one she loved, she'd turned to me with this hopeful expression. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she'd said. And it was. Still is, really, even if I've never found it comfortable. I wrote it down, then added the matching armchair and ottoman, the coffee table that went with the set. The kitchen appliances took up half a page by themselves. The refrigerator had been Amanda's idea after they moved in. She'd said the one that came with the house was outdated, didn't match her vision. I'd suggested maybe we could get it painted or add new handles, something simple. But she'd pulled up pictures on her phone, showing me these sleek, modern refrigerators with water dispensers and special temperature zones. "Wouldn't it be wonderful, Mom?" she'd asked, "to have something really nice?" So I'd bought it. Had it delivered and installed while they were at work, wanting to surprise them. The microwave, the stand mixer, the food processor, the espresso machine Michael had mentioned wanting just once in passing and that I'd ordered online the next day. I remembered the blender particularly well. Amanda had seen it at a friend's house and talked about it for weeks. Top of the line, commercial grade, the kind that could pulverize anything, $600. I'd bought it for her birthday and wrapped it myself, watching her unwrap it with genuine joy. "You're too good to me, Mom," she'd said, hugging me. At the time, I'd felt warm all over, proud, happy to make her happy. Now, writing it down on my list, I felt something different. Not quite sadness, more like recognition. The washer and dryer were next. Their old set had broken down about a year ago, and Michael had been stressed about the cost of replacing them. He'd started researching second-hand options, talking about how maybe they could make do with going to the laundromat for a while. I'd told him not to worry, told him I'd take care of it. The new set I bought wasn't second-hand. It was top of the line, with all the settings and features Amanda had admired at her sister's house. Steam clean, delicate cycle, extra capacity. "This is too much, Mom," Michael had said when they were delivered. But he'd accepted them anyway. I flipped to the next receipt in my folder. The lawnmower, the patio furniture, the grill Michael used every summer weekend. Page after page of purchases, each one connected to a memory, a moment, a feeling. The thing about giving is that it can feel so good in the moment. You see someone you love light up with happiness, and you think, yes, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is how I show I care. But there's a difference between giving freely and giving because you're afraid of what will happen if you stop. I'd crossed that line somewhere, and I hadn't even noticed. By the time I got to the utility bills, my hand was starting to cramp. I'd taken over the electric bill about 18 months ago. Michael had mentioned 1 month that it was higher than expected, something about the air conditioning running constantly during a heat wave. I'd offered to cover it, just that once, just to help. But once became twice. Twice became always. The water bill followed, then the internet, then the home insurance premium. Michael never asked directly. He'd just mention, casually, that money was tight, that things were expensive, that they were doing their best, but sometimes it was hard. And I'd step in. Every time. I looked at my list, now covering 3 full pages in my neat handwriting. Each line represented money I'd spent. Yes, but more than that, it represented a piece of myself I'd given away while believing I was building something. A family, a home, a place where I mattered. I set down my pen and flexed my fingers, looking at the blue folder with its diminishing stack of receipts still to go through. But I had enough, more than enough. The afternoon sun was slanting through my bedroom window now, warm and golden. I checked the time, 2:30. I'd been at this for hours. My stomach rumbled quietly, reminding me I hadn't eaten anything since that early cup of coffee. I gathered my papers, tucked them back into the folder along with the receipts, and stood up. My knees protested, stiff from sitting so long, but I made my way downstairs. The kitchen felt different now. Not sad, not angry, just neutral. A space I was moving through, rather than living in. I opened the pantry and scanned the shelves. Amanda kept it well organized, everything labeled and arranged by category. My eyes landed on a can of pumpkin puree, pushed toward the back. Pumpkin pie. My favorite. I'd planned to make 3 of them today. 1 for dinner, 1 for Michael to take to work next week, 1 to send home with my grandchildren. That had been the plan back when I thought I'd be spending today surrounded by family. Now, I decided I'd make just 1. A small one. For me. I pulled out the ingredients, setting them on the counter one by one. Flour, sugar, eggs, cream. The spices, cinnamon and nutmeg and ginger, their containers worn from years of use. My hands moved through the familiar motions, mixing the dough, rolling it out, pressing it into the pie tin. The filling came together easily, smooth and fragrant. As I slid the pie into the oven and set the timer, the kitchen filled with the scent of baking spices, rich and comforting, and entirely mine. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table, watching through the oven door as the pie began to set, its edges turning golden. For the first time in 3 years, I was cooking just for myself. Not thinking about whether Michael would want seconds, or if Amanda preferred less cinnamon, or if the grandkids would eat their vegetables if I promised them dessert. Just me, my pie, my kitchen, my choice. When the timer went off, I pulled the pie out and set it on the cooling rack. It looked perfect, the filling set just right, the crust flaky and golden brown. I didn't wait for it to cool completely. I cut myself a generous slice, plated it, and carried it to the table. The first bite was still warm, melting on my tongue with all those familiar flavors, sweet and spiced and perfect. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, and when I was done, I felt full in a way I hadn't in a long time. Not just my stomach, something deeper. That night, I slept soundly. No tossing, no waking at odd hours, no lying in the dark wondering if I'd done enough, been enough, given enough. Just deep, peaceful sleep. Because tomorrow, everything was going to change. I woke up Friday morning at 5:30, just like always. But unlike every other morning in this house, I felt energized, ready. I showered, dressed in comfortable clothes, and went downstairs to make breakfast, a proper one. Scrambled eggs, toast, a fresh pot of coffee. While I ate, I reviewed my list one more time, checking it against the receipts still spread across the table. Everything was in order. At 7:30, I heard the truck pull into the driveway. I looked out the window and saw a large white moving van with blue lettering on the side. 3 men climbed out, all young, probably in their 20s or 30s. They wore matching blue shirts and work gloves. I'd made cookies the night before, after my pie. Chocolate chip, because they're easy and everyone likes them. I arranged them on a plate and put on a fresh pot of coffee, then opened the front door before they could knock. "Good morning," I said, smiling warmly. You must be from Prestige Moving. The tallest one, with sandy hair and a kind face, stepped forward. Yes, ma'am. I'm Jason. This is Marcus and Tyler. We're here for your move. Wonderful. Please come in. I've made coffee and cookies. You'll need your energy today. They exchanged glances, probably surprised to be greeted with refreshments at 8 in the morning on Thanksgiving. But they followed me inside, wiping their feet carefully on the mat. This is very kind of you, Jason said, accepting a cup of coffee. Most people are usually stressed on moving day. Oh, I'm not stressed at all, I said pleasantly. I've been planning this very carefully. Tyler, the youngest with freckles scattered across his nose, took a cookie and bit into it. His eyes widened. These are really good, ma'am. Thank you, dear. My late husband always said my chocolate chip cookies were the best he'd ever tasted. I set down the plate and picked up my folder. Now, let me explain how this is going to work. I have a list of items to be moved, and I have receipts for each one. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Jason set down his coffee cup, suddenly more businesslike. Receipts? Yes. You see, everything we'll be moving today belongs to me. I purchased it all myself. I just want to be thorough, so there's no confusion. I handed him the list, and he scanned it, his eyebrows rising slightly as he read. This is quite a lot of furniture and appliances. I know. I've been generous over the years. I smiled softly. But now it's time for these things to come with me to my new place. Marcus, who had been quiet until now, looked around the living room. So we're taking the TV, the couch, the tables, everything in here? Everything on the list, I confirmed. Would you like to see the receipts as we go? I find it helps to be organized. Jason looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was smart enough to understand that this wasn't a typical moving job. But I'd been nothing but polite, had all my documentation ready, and was clearly in complete control of the situation. That won't be necessary, ma'am, he said finally. If you say it's yours, that's good enough for us. We just move what you tell us to move. Perfect. Let's start with the living room, shall we? They got to work, and I settled into the one chair I wasn't taking, watching them with my folder in my lap. Jason directed the other two with quiet efficiency. They wrapped the television carefully in blankets, securing it with tape. Tyler disconnected all the cables, coiling them neatly. Marcus helped lift the TV onto a dolly, and together they wheeled it out to the truck. Next came the sofa. It took all three of them to maneuver it through the doorway, tilting it at angles, communicating in that shorthand way people develop when they work together regularly. On 3, 1, 2, 3. I watched them work, occasionally checking items off my list. Each piece of furniture that disappeared through that door felt like taking a breath after holding it too long. The coffee table, the end tables, the lamps, the bookshelf with all of Amanda's decorating books still on it. I'd bought the bookshelf. The books could stay. By 9:30, the living room was empty, except for the chair I sat in. The space looked bigger somehow, the walls bare where frames had hung, the floor marked with indentations where furniture legs had rested. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air, making patterns on the hardwood floor. Kitchen next? Jason asked, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning. Yes, please. The refrigerator, microwave, and all the small appliances on the counter. Oh, and there's a stand mixer in the pantry. Tyler's eyes widened when he opened the refrigerator and saw how full it was. Ma'am, there's a lot of food in here. I know. Just leave it on the counter. They'll have to deal with that themselves. They emptied the refrigerator's contents onto the counter, an odd assortment of leftovers, condiments, and ingredients. Then they disconnected it and wheeled it out, leaving a dark rectangular space where it had stood. Marcus unplugged the microwave, the espresso machine, the blender. Each appliance joined its companions in the truck. By 11, they'd moved to the bedrooms, my furniture, my linens, my clothes, the washer and dryer from the laundry room, even the vacuum cleaner I'd bought last spring. The house was becoming a skeleton of itself. I made them stop for lunch, insisting they sit and eat the sandwiches I'd prepared. They were grateful for the break, their shirts damp with sweat despite the mild temperature. You're handling this really well, Jason said between bites. Most people get emotional when they move. I'm not most people, I said simply, and I'm not sad to leave. Sometimes you have to know when it's time to go. He nodded slowly, understanding passing between us without more words needed. By noon, the truck was packed. The house stood empty around us, echoing with each footstep. Bare walls, bare floors, bare counters, only the bones of it remained. I walked through each room one final time, not saying goodbye, just witnessing. This had been my home for 3 years, but it had never really been mine. In the kitchen, I stopped at the counter. Amanda's note still sat there, held down by the turkey magnet. I left it exactly where it was. Next to it, I placed the stack of bills that had arrived in the mail that morning: electric, water, internet. All in Michael's name now, since I'd called each company earlier in the week and had the accounts transferred. They'd figure it out eventually. Then I did something that made me smile. I took my house keys off my keyring, both copies, and set them beside the note and bills. From my purse, I pulled out a spool of red ribbon I'd bought years ago for Christmas presents. I tied the keys together with a neat bow, the ribbon bright and cheerful against the metal. A gift. Of sorts. Jason appeared in the doorway. "We're all loaded up, ma'am. Ready when you are." Just one moment. I looked around the kitchen one last time, at the empty space where the refrigerator had been, at the bare counters, at the naked windows without curtains. Then I picked up my purse, tucked my folder under my arm, and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. Jason held the door open for me, and I stepped outside into the cool November air. The sky was clear, bright blue, the kind of day that makes you grateful to be alive. I pulled the door closed behind me, hearing the lock click into place. The sound felt final. Complete. "Where to, ma'am?" Jason asked gently. I gave him the address of my new apartment, then climbed into my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror just once. The house stood there, empty and waiting, like a theater after the show has ended. The moving truck pulled out behind me, and together we drove away, towards something new, towards something mine. The Meadowbrook Senior Living Complex sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees. It wasn't fancy, just a low brick building with neat flower beds and a parking lot that actually had spaces available. I'd visited twice before signing the lease, walking through the halls, peeking into the community room, making sure it felt right. It did. The building manager, a woman named Patricia with silver hair and a warm smile, met me in the lobby. She'd been expecting me, had my keys ready and waiting. "Welcome home, Mrs. Patterson," she said, handing me a small envelope. "You're in Unit 2B, second floor. The elevator is just down that hall. If you need anything at all, my office is right here." "Thank you, Patricia. The movers should be arriving shortly." "Perfect. I'll make sure the service elevator is available for them." I rode up to the second floor alone, the elevator humming quietly. When the doors opened, I found myself in a clean hallway with soft beige carpet and wall sconces that cast a gentle light. Unit 2B was the third door on the right. I slid the key into the lock and turned it, pushing the door open slowly. The apartment was smaller than what I'd left behind, but it was mine. Completely, entirely mine. Sunlight poured through the windows in the living room, illuminating honey-colored wood floors. The kitchen was compact but functional, with white cabinets and newer appliances. There was one bedroom, one bathroom, and a little balcony that overlooked the courtyard below. I walked through it slowly, opening cabinets, testing the faucet, standing on the balcony and breathing in the cool air. It smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The movers arrived 20 minutes later, and I directed them where to place everything. The television went against the living room wall. The sofa faced it, with the end tables on either side. My bed in the bedroom, my dresser against the opposite wall. Everything fit perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle finally in their right places. Jason and his crew worked quickly, and by mid-afternoon, the truck was empty and my apartment was full. "You need anything else, ma'am?" Jason asked as they prepared to leave. "No, dear. You've all been wonderful. Thank you." I tipped them generously, pressing cash into each of their hands despite their protests. They'd earned it, and more than that, they'd been kind. In my experience, kindness deserves to be rewarded. After they left, I stood in the center of my living room and just breathed. Silence surrounded me, but it was different from the silence in that house yesterday morning. This wasn't absence. This was peace. I started unpacking slowly, taking my time. I hung Harold's photograph on the wall beside my television, right where I could see it from the sofa. In the picture, he was laughing at something, his eyes bright with joy. It had been taken at our 40th anniversary party, just 2 years before he passed. "Well, Harold," I said softly to the picture, "we're starting fresh. What do you think?" Of course he didn't answer, but I liked to think he'd be proud. I unpacked my dishes next, arranging them in the kitchen cabinets. My good china, the everyday plates, the mugs I'd collected over the years. Each one had a story, a memory attached to it. The teapot Harold had given me for our 25th anniversary went on the counter where I could see it every morning. It was white porcelain with delicate blue flowers painted on the sides, and even though I rarely used it, I loved looking at it. Around 4 in the afternoon, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find an older woman standing there, probably around my age, with short white curls and bright blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She held a covered dish in her hands. "Hello?" she said cheerfully. "I'm Ruth from 2D down the hall. Patricia mentioned you were moving in today, and I thought you might appreciate something for dinner. Moving is exhausting." I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly at the kindness. "That's so thoughtful. Please, come in." She stepped inside, looking around approvingly. "Oh, you've already got it feeling like home. That's a talent." "Thank you. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "I'd love some." We sat at my small kitchen table, and Ruth told me about the building. How the residents had a book club on Tuesdays. How there was a garden plot out back if I wanted to grow vegetables. How movie night in the community room was surprisingly well attended. "It's a good group of people here," she said. "We look out for each other. But everyone respects privacy too, you know? It's a nice balance." "That sounds perfect." She stayed for half an hour, and by the time she left, I felt like I'd made my first friend. That evening, I heated up the casserole Ruth had brought. It was chicken and rice, simple but delicious, seasoned just right. I ate it on my new sofa, watching the sun set through my window. The sky turned orange, then pink, then purple, colors bleeding into each other like watercolor paint. I could hear faint sounds from other apartments, televisions playing, someone's laughter, the ordinary sounds of people living their lives. But in my space, everything was quiet. I washed my dish, dried it, put it away. Then I made myself a cup of tea in Harold's teapot, carrying it to the balcony. The courtyard below was peaceful. A few benches arranged around a small fountain. Christmas lights had been strung in the trees, though they weren't turned on yet. The air was cool but not cold, perfect for sitting outside with something warm to drink. I sipped my tea and watched the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. My phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, began to buzz. I heard it through the open balcony door, a persistent vibration against the countertop. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped. Then it started again. I took another sip of my tea, watching a bird land on the fountain's edge. The phone kept buzzing. I smiled to myself, serene and unbothered, and turned my attention back to the sky. Whatever it was could wait. For the first time in 3 years, I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do. And nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to disturb this moment. 5 days. That's how long my peace lasted before the storm arrived. I'd spent those days settling in, learning the rhythms of my new life. Morning coffee on the balcony, afternoon walks around the neighborhood, evening tea while reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years. Ruth stopped by twice more, and I'd met a few other neighbors. Everyone was friendly but not intrusive, exactly the balance I needed. On Wednesday evening, I was making dinner when my phone started buzzing. I'd left it on the charger in my bedroom, so at first I didn't hear it, but when I went to change into my pajamas after eating, I found it lit up and vibrating insistently. 18 missed calls. I picked it up, looking at the screen. Michael's name appeared again and again, interspersed with Amanda's. There were also a few calls from numbers I didn't recognize. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear what had happened, to know if they were all right. But a larger part of me, the part that had been quietly growing stronger all week, told me to wait. So I did. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and carried the phone to the living room. I sat on my sofa, the one I'd paid for and moved and now got to enjoy in peace, and opened my messages. The first one was from Amanda, sent that afternoon at 3:47 p.m. "Mom, we just got home. Where are you? Please call us." The next one came 10 minutes later. "Mom, this isn't funny. Something's happened to the house. Call me right now." Then Michael's texts started appearing. "Mom, please answer your phone. The house was robbed. Everything's gone. We need to talk to you immediately." "Mom, I'm worried. Where are you?" I sipped my tea slowly, reading each message with the same calm detachment I might read the newspaper. There were voicemails too. 7 of them. I put the phone on speaker and listened. The first one was Amanda's voice, high-pitched and strained. "Mom, oh my God, Mom, where are you? We came home and the house is empty. Someone took everything. The TV, the furniture, even the refrigerator. We're calling the police. Please, please call us back." The second was Michael, trying to sound calm but failing. "Mom, it's me. Listen, something's happened while we were gone. I need you to call me as soon as you get this. It's important." The messages grew more frantic as they went on. Amanda crying, Michael's voice getting sharper, more demanding. Both of them asking where I was, if I was safe, what I knew. I finished my tea and set the cup down gently. Then I did something I'd set up before I left. Something I'd planned carefully, even though I hadn't been certain I'd need it. I opened the Ring camera app on my phone. Michael had installed the system 2 years ago, wanting to monitor packages and keep an eye on the house when they were away. He'd added me to the account so I could check on things when I was out. I'd never removed my access. The camera feed was still active. I scrolled back to that afternoon, to the moment they would have arrived home. The timestamp read 3:42 p.m. I pressed play. The video showed the front door opening. Amanda came through first, pulling a rolling suitcase behind her, her face glowing with what looked like a fresh tan. She was laughing at something, turning back to say something to Michael, who followed with the kids trailing behind him. They looked happy, relaxed, still basking in the glow of their vacation. Amanda wheeled her suitcase toward the living room, probably planning to drop it there before unpacking. I watched her face change as she stepped through the doorway. The laughter died. Her mouth opened. The suitcase handle slipped from her fingers. Michael appeared behind her, his expression shifting from curiosity to confusion to shock in the span of 3 seconds. "What the—" His voice came through the speaker, tinny but clear. "Where's everything?" Amanda walked further into the empty room, her hands coming up to her face. "The couch, the TV, everything's gone." I watched Michael rush to the kitchen, heard him call out in dismay. "The refrigerator! Amanda, they took the refrigerator!" The children, sensing their parents' panic, started crying. The youngest clutched Amanda's leg while the older one asked what was happening over and over. Amanda pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling 911. Michael paced through the frame, his hands on his head, looking around wildly as if the furniture might reappear if he just looked hard enough. How did someone take everything? How did nobody notice? I took another sip of my tea, watching my son spiral into confusion. There was something almost clinical about it, seeing their panic from this distance, through this screen. Like watching a play where I already knew the ending. Amanda's voice rose. "Yes, we'd like to report a robbery. Our entire house has been emptied. Everything's gone." Michael disappeared into another room, probably checking to see what else was missing. I heard him shout from off camera, "The washer and dryer too! They took the washer and dryer!" A part of me, the part that had spent years being a mother, wanted to feel sorry for them, to see their distress and want to fix it, to make it better. But I couldn't, because this wasn't about them being hurt. This was about them finally understanding what they'd lost, what they'd taken for granted, what they'd left behind without a second thought. I fast-forwarded through the next hour. Watched the police arrive, watched Michael and Amanda giving statements, gesturing at empty rooms, their faces drawn with stress and confusion. One officer walked through, taking notes. The other stood in the kitchen, apparently asking questions. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could imagine. What was taken? When did you notice? Do you have any idea who might have done this? Amanda kept shaking her head, wiping her eyes. Michael's face had gone from shocked to angry, his jaw tight, his movements sharp. They had no idea. Not yet. But they would soon enough. I watched a little longer, until the officers left, and Michael and Amanda were alone in the empty house, sitting on the floor because there was nowhere else to sit. Amanda had her head in her hands. Michael was on his phone, probably trying to call me again. I turned off the video. The living room around me felt warm and safe, filled with my furniture, my belongings, my choices. Outside my window, the evening had deepened into night, and the courtyard lights had come on, casting a soft glow over the fountain. My phone buzzed again. Another call from Michael. I looked at Harold's photograph on the wall. He seemed to be smiling at me with that knowing look he used to get when I finally stood up for myself about something. I didn't watch long. I said softly to his picture. I already knew how it would end. I silenced my phone, set it face down on the coffee table, and picked up my book. Whatever happened next, they'd have to figure it out themselves. The knock came 2 days later, Friday afternoon. I'd been expecting it, honestly. Not the exact timing, but the fact of it. I knew Michael and Amanda wouldn't let this go without pushing further, without trying every angle they could think of. I was in the kitchen making lunch, a simple grilled cheese sandwich, when I heard the firm rapping on my door. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, official sounding. I turned off the stove, wiped my hands on a towel, and walked calmly to the door. Through the peephole, I could see 2 police officers standing in the hallway. One was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair and an earnest expression. The other was older, probably close to retirement age, with gray at his temples and the kind of face that had seen everything. I opened the door and smiled pleasantly. "Good afternoon, officers. How can I help you?" The younger one spoke first, pulling out a small notepad. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Are you Mrs. Margaret Patterson?" "I am." "Ma'am, we're here regarding a report filed by your son, Michael Wright. He claims there's been a theft at his residence, and he suggested you might have information about it." "Oh, I see. Well, please come in. Can I offer you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." They exchanged a glance. The older officer smiled slightly. "That would be nice, thank you." I led them into my living room, gesturing for them to sit on my sofa while I went to pour coffee. My hands were perfectly steady as I prepared 2 cups, adding cream and sugar to a small tray, along with some of the cookies Ruth had brought over yesterday. When I returned, they were looking around my apartment, taking in the furniture, the television on the wall, the general coziness of the space. I set the tray on the coffee table and settled into my armchair across from them. "Please help yourselves." The younger officer accepted a cup gratefully. "Thank you, ma'am. This is very kind." "Not at all. Now, you mentioned my son filed a report?" The older officer set down his coffee and leaned forward slightly. "Yes, ma'am. He and his wife returned from a trip to find their home had been cleared out. Furniture, appliances, electronics. They seem to believe you might know something about what happened." I nodded slowly, as if considering this. "I see. Well, officers, I can certainly help clear this up. Would you like to see my receipts?" The younger one blinked. "Your receipts?" "Yes, dear, for all the items in question." I stood and walked to my desk, retrieving the blue folder I'd kept so carefully organized. I returned and handed it to the older officer. "Everything's in there. Every purchase, every payment. You'll see my name on each one." He opened the folder and began flipping through the pages. His partner leaned over to look as well, their expressions shifting from curious to understanding. The older officer read aloud from one of the receipts. 65-inch television, purchased December 2023. Margaret Patterson. He looked up at me. "You bought this?" "I did." "A Christmas gift for my son. I have the credit card statement to match, if you need it." He continued reading. "Sofa set, $3,000. Refrigerator, $2,800. Washer and dryer set." He was quiet for a moment, then looked at me with something like respect in his eyes. "Ma'am, this is quite a lot of purchases." "I'm aware. I was helping my family. Or at least I thought I was." The younger officer was still looking through the receipts, his brow furrowed. "But these are all at the address where the theft was reported." "That's correct. I lived there for 3 years. I purchased those items while living there, with my own money, and I have proof of every transaction." I paused, taking a sip of my coffee. When I decided to move out, I took what belonged to me. The older officer closed the folder carefully and set it on his lap. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, why the sudden move?" I looked at him directly, my voice calm and clear. "I woke up on Thanksgiving morning to an empty house. My son, his wife, and their children had flown to Hawaii without telling me. They left a note saying I wouldn't have enjoyed the flight." I smiled softly. It made me realize some things about my situation. So I decided to make a change. The younger officer's expression softened. "They left you alone on Thanksgiving?" "They did." There was a moment of silence. The older officer picked up his coffee and took a long drink, then set it down with a sigh. "Mrs. Patterson," he said gently, "I don't see any crime here. Everything in this folder shows you legally purchased these items. You have every right to take your own property." "That's what I thought, but I wanted to be sure. I didn't want any misunderstandings." The younger one was still processing. "But your son thinks his house was robbed." "I imagine he does, but I didn't rob anyone. I simply removed my belongings from a home I was no longer living in." I gestured around my apartment. "As you can see, everything's here in my new place, where it belongs." The older officer stood, and his partner followed suit. "Well, ma'am, I think we have everything we need. Your documentation is thorough." He handed the folder back to me. "I appreciate the coffee and your time." "Of course. I'm sorry you had to make the trip for something that turned out to be a family matter rather than a criminal one. It happens more often than you'd think." He pulled out a business card and set it on the coffee table. "If you have any trouble, any harassment from your family about this, you call me directly, all right?" "Thank you, officer. That's very kind." I walked them to the door. As they stepped into the hallway, I could hear voices coming from the elevator area. Raised voices, growing louder. Michael and Amanda. They must have followed the police here. The elevator doors opened and they rushed out, spotting the officers immediately. Amanda's face was red, her voice sharp. "Officers, did you talk to her? Did she tell you what she did?" Michael was right behind her, his expression dark. "She stole from us. She emptied our entire house." The older officer held up his hand calmly. "Mr. Wright, Mrs. Wright, we've reviewed the situation. Your mother has receipts proving she purchased everything that was removed from your home. She broke no laws." Amanda's mouth fell open. "But that's our furniture, our appliances." "Actually, ma'am, legally, they belong to whoever purchased them. Your mother purchased them. They're hers." Michael shook his head violently. "That can't be right. This is our house. She can't just take everything." "Sir, ownership of property is determined by who paid for it. Your mother has extensive documentation. There's nothing criminal here." I stood in my doorway, watching this exchange with quiet composure. Amanda's eyes found mine, filled with fury and disbelief. Michael looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The younger officer spoke up. "Folks, I suggest you try to work this out as a family, but from a legal standpoint, the case is closed." The officers moved toward the elevator, leaving Michael and Amanda standing in the hallway, staring at me. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then I stepped back into my apartment. "I hope you enjoyed Hawaii," I said softly, and I closed the door. The letter arrived 3 weeks later, delivered by certified mail. I signed for it at the door, thanking the postal worker, and carried it inside. The envelope was official-looking, with the county courthouse address in the corner. I set it on my kitchen table and made myself tea before opening it. Inside was a summons to small claims court. Michael and Amanda were suing me for emotional damages, claiming my actions had caused them undue stress and financial hardship. The amount they were seeking was $12,000. I read the document twice, then set it down beside my teacup. Ruth knocked on my door an hour later, catching me as I was watering the plants I'd placed on my balcony. "You look troubled," she said when I let her in. "Everything all right?" I showed her the letter. She read it, her eyebrows rising higher with each line. "They're suing you? After everything?" "Apparently." "Do you have a lawyer?" "I don't think I'll need one. I have my receipts, and the truth is fairly simple." I poured her a cup of tea. "Besides, I've learned that sometimes the best defense is just showing up prepared." "You're braver than I would be." I smiled. "Not brave, just tired of being afraid." The court date was set for early December, a gray Tuesday morning when the sky threatened snow but hadn't quite delivered. I woke early, as always, and took my time getting ready. I chose my nicest coat, the charcoal one with pearl buttons that Harold had always said made me look distinguished. A simple dress underneath, comfortable shoes, my small purse with the blue folder tucked safely inside. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who was calm, ready, not angry, not anxious, just certain. The courthouse was downtown, a brick building with tall windows and stone steps leading up to heavy wooden doors. I arrived 15 minutes early, checking in at the clerk's desk and finding my way to the correct courtroom. The hallway outside was busy with people waiting for their cases. Lawyers in dark suits shuffled papers. Nervous-looking individuals sat on benches, whispering to companions. The whole place smelled like floor polish and old wood. I found a bench near the door and sat down, folding my hands over my purse. 10 minutes later, Michael and Amanda arrived. Amanda wore a navy blue suit, her hair pulled back severely, makeup applied carefully. She looked like she'd dressed to impress, to appear professional and wronged. Michael wore slacks and a button-down shirt, his tie slightly crooked. His face was already flushed, whether from the cold outside or from anger. I couldn't tell. They saw me immediately. Amanda's jaw tightened. Michael looked away, focusing on the floor numbers above the elevator instead. They sat on the opposite side of the hallway, not speaking to me, barely speaking to each other. The tension between us was thick enough to feel, but I remained still, unbothered, my hands resting peacefully on my lap. When our case was called, we filed into the courtroom together but separately, like strangers who happened to be walking in the same direction. The room was smaller than I'd expected. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The judge's bench sat elevated at the front, the seal of the county mounted on the wall behind it. There were a few rows of seats for observers, mostly empty except for a couple of people waiting for cases after hours. The judge entered, and we all stood. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He settled into his seat and looked over the paperwork in front of him. Case number 4782, Wright versus Patterson. Let's proceed. Michael and Amanda approached the table on the left. I took my place at the table on the right. Mr. and Mrs. Wright, the judge said, looking at them over his glasses. You're the plaintiffs. Please state your case. Amanda spoke first, her voice tight but controlled. Your Honor, my mother-in-law removed property from our home without our knowledge or permission. While she claims she purchased these items, they were part of our household. We relied on them for daily living. Her actions have caused us severe emotional distress and financial hardship. We had to replace essential appliances, furniture, everything. It's been devastating. The judge nodded, writing something down. And you're seeking damages for this distress? Yes, Your Honor. $12,000. I see. He turned to me. Mrs. Patterson, how do you respond to these claims? I stood, keeping my voice steady and respectful. Your Honor, I don't dispute that I removed those items, but I do dispute that I had no right to do so. Everything I took, I purchased with my own money. I have documentation for each item. I opened my folder and approached the bench, handing it to the bailiff who passed it to the judge. He opened it and began reading. The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of pages turning. I watched his face as he read, saw his expression shift from neutral to thoughtful, to something that looked almost like sympathy. He read for what felt like a long time but was probably only 5 minutes. Finally, he looked up. Mrs. Patterson, these receipts are very thorough. Thank you, Your Honor. I've always believed in keeping good records. He turned to Michael and Amanda. Mr. and Mrs. Wright, I'm looking at receipts here that clearly show your mother purchased a television, furniture, appliances, and various other items. Her name is on every single one. He paused. Can you provide any documentation showing that you purchased these items? Michael shifted uncomfortably. We lived with them. They were in our house. But did you pay for them? Silence. Amanda spoke up, her voice rising slightly. She was living with us. She was helping with the household. Those purchases were contributions to our shared living situation. That may be how you interpreted it, ma'am, but legally, whoever purchases an item owns it. Mrs. Patterson has clear proof of ownership. He closed the folder. Furthermore, emotional distress claims require substantial evidence of harm. Being upset that someone removed their own property doesn't meet that threshold. "But Your Honor," Michael started. The judge held up his hand. "Mr. Wright, I understand this situation is difficult, but the law is clear." Case dismissed. He looked directly at Michael and Amanda. "I suggest you reconsider filing claims without proper evidence in the future." He struck his gavel once, the sound echoing in the quiet room. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said quietly. He nodded to me, something kind in his expression, then gathered his papers and stood. I collected my folder, tucked it back into my purse, and turned to leave. As I walked past their table, Amanda muttered something under her breath. I didn't catch all of it, but I heard the word selfish clearly enough. I kept walking. Michael stood frozen, staring at the floor. Our eyes didn't meet. I don't think he could bring himself to look at me. I pushed through the courtroom doors and into the hallway. The building felt warmer now, or maybe I just felt lighter. I walked down the corridor, past the waiting benches, toward the main entrance. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, stinging my cheeks. The sky had darkened, and tiny snowflakes were beginning to fall, drifting lazily down from gray clouds. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, breathing in the winter air, watching the snow dust the sidewalk. It should have felt lonely, standing there by myself, estranged from my son, cut off from my grandchildren, walking away from the only family I had left. But it didn't feel lonely. It felt like freedom. 4 months passed like pages turning in a quiet book. Winter settled over the city, then softened into early spring. The trees outside my apartment building budded green, then burst into full leaf. Life moved forward, gentle and steady, and I moved with it. I'd found my rhythm at Meadowbrook. Tuesday mornings were book club with Ruth and 5 other women who loved mysteries as much as I did. Wednesday afternoons, I volunteered at the community center downtown, teaching younger seniors how to use computers and smartphones. Thursdays, I painted in the art room on the first floor, discovering I had a decent hand for watercolors when given the chance. My apartment filled with small joys. A new throw pillow Ruth helped me pick out. Paintings I'd made myself hanging on the walls. Fresh flowers from the farmer's market every Sunday. The silence I'd been so afraid of never felt empty. It felt full. Rich, mine. I spoke to Harold's photograph often, updating him on my days, asking his opinion on things even though I already knew what he'd say. Sometimes I'd laugh at my own jokes, and that felt okay too. My phone stayed mostly quiet. Michael never called, Amanda never texted. The grandchildren, I assumed, were told some version of events that painted me as the villain. That stung, sometimes, late at night when my mind wandered, but it didn't break me. Because I'd learned something important in these months. You can't make people value you. You can only decide to value yourself. And now, on another Thanksgiving morning, I woke at 5:30 to sunlight streaming through my curtains and the smell of coffee brewing on a timer I'd set the night before. This year felt different. Not heavy with expectation or performance, just open, ready. I'd invited Ruth and 2 other neighbors, Bernard and Louise, for dinner. Nothing fancy, just the 4 of us sharing a meal. Bernard was bringing rolls from his favorite bakery. Louise promised her famous cranberry sauce. I was handling the turkey, which was smaller than any I'd ever made but perfect for our little group. I moved through the morning preparations with ease. The turkey went into the oven. Potatoes bubbled on the stove. I set my small table with the good china. The pieces that had belonged to my mother and then to me, never to anyone else. 4 plates, 4 napkins, 4 glasses. Then, on impulse, I pulled out 1 more plate and set it at the head of the table. Empty. Just in case. Not for Michael, not really. But for the possibility that someday, somehow, there might be reconciliation. Or maybe just for hope itself, which deserved a seat at the table. Ruth arrived first, carrying a pumpkin pie that smelled like heaven. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said, hugging me at the door. "Your place smells wonderful. Thank you for coming. I'm so glad you're here." Bernard and Louise came together, laughing about something that had happened in the elevator. Bernard's rolls were still warm in their bag. Louise's cranberry sauce gleamed ruby red in a crystal bowl. We settled into easy conversation while I finished cooking, everyone pitching in to help. Bernard mashed the potatoes, Ruth set out the drinks, Louise arranged the food on serving platters. By noon, we were seated around the table, everything laid out beautifully. "Should we say grace?" Louise asked. I nodded. We joined hands, the four of us making a small circle, and Louise spoke a simple blessing, thankful for food, for friendship, for another year of life. When she finished, we squeezed hands once before letting go. The meal was perfect. Not because the food was fancy or the portions were huge, but because it was real. We ate and talked and laughed. Bernard told stories about his years as a school teacher. Ruth shared updates about her daughter in California. Louise asked about my painting classes. No one asked me to get up and fetch things. No one expected me to serve them first. We passed dishes around, helped ourselves, complimented each other's contributions. It was partnership, friendship, equality. Exactly what family should be. After dinner, we moved to the living room with coffee and pie. Ruth had brought a deck of cards, and we played a few rounds of rummy while the afternoon light slanted golden through my windows. Around 4, they started gathering their things to leave. "This was lovely," Louise said, hugging me at the door. "Thank you for hosting." "We should do this again," Bernard added. "Maybe Christmas?" "I'd like that very much." After they left, I cleaned up slowly, putting away dishes, storing leftovers, wiping down counters. The apartment felt warm and lived in, filled with the remnants of good conversation and better company. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the balcony. The air was cool but not cold, comfortable with my cardigan wrapped around me. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the courtyard below, someone had turned on the fountain, and I could hear water trickling softly. I thought about last Thanksgiving, about waking to that empty house, about finding that note, about the shock and hurt that had cut so deep I'd felt it in my bones. And then I thought about what came after. The quiet decision, the careful planning, the moment I'd taken my life back with both hands and refused to let go. Was I sad about losing Michael? Yes, sometimes. He was still my son, and that bond didn't just disappear because we were no longer speaking. But was I sad about how things turned out? No. Because here, in this small apartment with my own furniture and my own choices and my own peace, I'd found something I'd been missing for years. Myself. The woman I'd been before I started shrinking to fit other people's expectations. The woman Harold had fallen in love with, who knew her own mind and wasn't afraid to stand in her truth. She'd been buried under years of trying to be needed, trying to be useful, trying to buy love with money and time and endless sacrifice. But she hadn't disappeared. She'd just been waiting. My phone, sitting on the table inside, stayed silent. No calls, no texts, no demands or expectations or emergencies that only I could solve. Just silence. And in that silence, I heard something I'd been missing. My own voice, telling me I was enough, telling me I deserved peace, telling me that walking away from people who didn't value me wasn't cruel, it was necessary. The sky deepened to purple, and stars began appearing one by one. I finished my tea and went back inside, closing the balcony door softly behind me. I looked at that 5th plate still sitting on the table, empty and waiting. I thought about removing it, putting it back in the cabinet where it belonged. But I left it there. Not because I expected Michael to show up, not because I was holding on to false hope, but because I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean letting people hurt you again. It just means releasing the weight of anger so you can move forward lighter. And I was lighter now. So much lighter. I washed the plate and put it away, along with the others. Then I turned off the lights, checked the locks, and headed to my bedroom. Before I got into bed, I stood in front of Harold's photograph one more time. "We did all right today," I told him softly. "I think you would have liked Bernard. He reminds me of you." In the photograph, Harold smiled his eternal smile. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up, feeling the familiar comfort of my own space, my own choices, my own peace. They'd left me behind that Thanksgiving morning, thinking I'd stay small and quiet and grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. But I'd learned something they never expected. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, silence is how you find your strength. Sometimes, Silence is how you take back your life. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't see your worth and build a life where you finally see it yourself. I closed my eyes and drifted into sleep, surrounded by peace I'd earned. Every bill in my name. Every item I used, purchased by me. Every morning that felt like a gift instead of an obligation. This was my life now. And it was beautiful. Before you go, I want to thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible or taken for granted, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share your thoughts, your own experiences, or just let me know you were here. And please, hit that like button and subscribe. These stories matter because they remind us we're not alone. Thank you for being part of this community. Until next time.